cuts in a lot of different ways.
David, I want to talk about the restrictions that are in place for former President Donald Trump, and also the lead up to the sentencing on July 11th, these kind of pre-sentencing interviews that have to take place by the probations department, in which they'll interview, for instance, Donald Trump's family members. They could interview Don Jr., they could interview Ivanka, Eric Trump, Melania, people connected to the former president. I know they're not necessarily required to do so. What is required by the former president throughout that process?
Well, Yasmin, what's required depends on whether or not he wants to get sentenced to probation as opposed to go to jail. So they're not strict requirements, but they're highly persuasive for the person who's ultimately going to be deciding your fate. The first big question that gets asked in these interviews is, what's your criminal history? Former President Trump doesn't have any. He aces that part of the interview. They're going to ask, do you have any substance abuse issues or issues with alcohol that we might need to take into consideration? He claims he does not. He aces that part of the interview. Then he's going to get to questions that I think he's going to find very uncomfortable. For example, they're allowed to assess his mental health. They're allowed to determine whether or not he needs counseling and whether or not he would cooperate with participating in counseling. I think he fails that part of the examination. And they're also going to ask how he feels about the charges that were brought against him and whether or not he accepts the jury's verdict. As you said, he doesn't have to answer, but the problem here is it's not difficult to look at statements that he's made publicly about both. And it's impossible for Judge Marchand to ignore those. It's also impossible to ignore the fact that Judge Marchand appears to be somebody who really cares about fairness. And it's almost impossible not to compare Trump with Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen was an imperfect trial witness. He's a near perfect punishment witness to compare Trump to in this regard. You've got somebody who pled guilty and he accepted his punishment. He shows remorse and he did his time. Different charges, different structure, but still, it's very difficult to look at someone who says, look, I didn't do anything wrong at all. I don't have any remorse at all, and then conclude that that person shouldn't serve any jail time at all.
David, DA Allen Bragg, he had this press conference quickly after the conviction just across the street. And he did not indicate either way as to whether or not the prosecutors were going to ask for, or the Manhattan DA's office is going to ask for jail time. What goes into accounting for what they, in fact, ask for when it comes to sentencing?
Yasmin, they're going to think about the exact same things Judge Marchand is going to think about. And that's all what I broke down in terms of what that pre-sentencing interview is going to consist of. I think something that Bragg is also going to think about is making sure that no one can come back and say that Trump received any unfair treatment that could be used against him in terms of an appeal. And in that regard, it's very easy to look at this conviction or soon to be conviction and conclude, man, this was a slam dunk from the beginning. It was not. And the things that Bragg has done very well are easy to overlook, not the least of which is staying calm in the face of all the public attacks against the system, which he's the center of when it involves a prosecution. So I think his recommendation will be balanced so that no one can come back and claim that Trump didn't get a fair trial. And former President Trump is correct about one thing. He did receive an unfair trial. It was wildly unfair in his favor. He got away with things that people never get away with, not from the judge and not from the prosecutor. And all of that will inhibit his ability ultimately to successfully appeal this case.
I was speaking, David, to Stormy Daniels' attorney in the hour before last. This is my third hour on now. And I asked him if Stormy was actually going to attend the sentencing hearing. And he said if the prosecutors ask for her to attend, she'll likely attend because she respects them. If she were to attend the sentencing hearing, would she have any role in that hearing?
Yasmin, I don't think she'll have any role.